Hey guys, and welcome to this quick webinar on the phases of a fitness journey. So I thought I'd put this together just so that you guys can understand how when you kind of come on to a coaching program, there's certain phases that you're going to end up being in. And what you can see is when clients are in different phases, they're getting different advice kind of at that time, and it's very easy to start comparing your progress to kind of somebody else's progress and then feeling kind of like demotivated because this person's on more calories than I am, or this person's getting quicker results than I am. And I just wanted to kind of go through this video to explain one, that there's kind of like three main phases to a fitness journey and the mistakes a lot of people make and why they end up on what's called like a yo-yo dieting cycle, because they only do like one phase and then they don't realize that there's kind of other aspects to it. And two, so that we don't get into this trap of like comparing ourselves to other people within the coaching program who we should be using their wins to build ourselves up rather than tear ourselves down. So, as I said, this webinar is titled The Phases of a Fitness Journey. So, there's three main phases to your fitness journey. You've got the cutting phase, which is where the majority of people start. The majority of people come to me and they want to lose some body fat, or they come to me and they say they want to build some muscle tissue. And when we look at their current physique, it's quite hard to see where they kind of need to build up because they've just got a little bit too much body fat on their frame, and therefore there's something called insulin sensitivity, and they're just not able to build massive amounts of muscle tissue, just because if we put them into a calorie excess, once your body fat gets above a certain level, your body's not going to lay down new muscle tissue. It's all to do, the hormones that body fat release they basically mimic estrogen. Estrogen is the opposite to testosterone. So when you get too fat, that's your body starts leaking these hormones into your system, and it makes a kind of like anabolic environment. That's why when you see men with large levels of body fat end up with man boobs and things like that, because the estrogen's coming in, they start to develop breast tissue and all that lovely stuff. So that's why the majority of people start on a cutting phase. So after a cutting phase, we'll always transition into a maintenance phase. So there's a couple of reasons behind that. Number one is if you've just dropped a shed load of body fat, your body is going to be super sensitive to any extra calories that are coming in. So basically, we don't want to pile on the body fat again. We've got to kind of like normalize that new weight so that your body is kind of comfortable there and it's not just going to shove all that weight kind of back on straight away. And this is what most people don't realize. What they do is they get a coach to lose the body fat, they reach their goal and they're like, right, I don't need coaching anymore. They go back to the way they were eating before and they pile all that weight back on, and it comes on really, really quickly. As I said, because your body is like super sensitized to adding new tissue on, because you've just gone through anywhere between 8, 12, 16, 20 weeks on a diet, like you might have moved 10 kilos away from the weight you were kind of at the start. And then the last one is a building phase. So some people come to me and they say, right, I want to build muscle tissue. If it's kind of like a male, I want to look bigger. If it's a woman, it might be, right, I want to look more toned, or I want to kind of like have the shapes, the curves. So I still want to look feminine, but I want to build up my legs or build up my glutes or whatever it is. So as I said, these work on a cycle. We're in one of these three phases at any particular time during our fitness journey. So as I said, the initial phase, the fat loss phase, is where the majority of people start. Let me move my camera over here. So here's two of the guys that have worked with me. These results were achieved over kind of like an 8 to 12 week period, whereas this one was more like 6 months to a year. So Tom here dropped somewhere between 7 and 8 kilos, but as you can see, his body fat wasn't as high to start off with. So we can see the definition and stuff kind of coming through. Whereas Jay lost about I think it was 2 or 3 stone by the time we got these after photos. So that's why it took that a little bit longer, because we had to go through several cycles of kind of being in a fat loss phase. So if you speak to Jay, he will tell you how he got diet breaks during this time. He was still being social, but essentially he was dieting for about 12 months. So the initial setup of a fat loss phase is we want to get you into a calorie deficit through controlling food, as well as adding in some resistance training. So that's where we'll kind of always start, and we start with some BMR equations. So if you want the specifics of BMR equations, I've done another webinar on how to calculate your deficit. So just drop me a DM and I can ping you across that webinar if you're wanting to kind of do that at a later date. But for all you guys that are training with me, that's what is on your hybrid tracker sheet. When we go in and we put in your weight and your body fat percentage, and it spits out kind of your carbs, fats, and proteins. Basically, I've automated that side of it because that spreadsheet does this equation for us very, very quickly. We're then implementing a training program. So depending on what level of experience you've got when you come into the program, it can be very, very basic, or if you've got more experience, we might go straight into like split routines, etc. But again, this is person dependent, depending on kind of what level you're coming into the system on and what level of experience that you've got. Also, what your goals are. So if your goals are to build muscle, and you've got more experience, you're probably going to go into a split that's going to be a little bit more intense than somebody that's just coming in. They've never trained with weights before, and their main goal is to kind of like burn fat. They're going to be on a different training program. We're then monitoring activity. So the majority of us have got smartphones nowadays. So on your smartphone, you download a pedometer, which is a step counting app, and we're just kind of going to monitor where that is currently. And then we're going to be starting accurately tracking food. So when I say accurately tracking food, the mistake a lot of people make is that they start tracking food, but number one, they're not weighing it. And number two, they're not really tracking everything. So I had an example the other day where somebody had been training with me for 3 or 4 months, but hadn't been tracking the milk he was adding into his cups of tea. And when he started adding that in, it turned out that was an extra 200 calories a day, which would then explain why when we first started, it took 3 or 4 weeks to start to get that body weight, that body fat to kind of come down, because there was extra calories in there that it kind of wasn't accounting for. So that's always the first thing we're going to look at when you are kind of like tracking food is, are you accounting for everything? Are you accounting for like the oils that you're kind of cooking in? Are you accounting for any milk that goes into teas and coffees? Are you accounting for any just extra little snacky bits? Basically, if it goes in your mouth, it needs to kind of be tracked. And what that will also teach you is where is the energy dense food, and where is the nutrient dense food. So when you have a salad and you put it into MyFitnessPal, it might be 50 calories. Whereas if you have a Mars bar, which you'll be hungry again in an hour, but there's 150, 160 calories in there, then it's one of those things, as you go further into it and as we start pulling your calories down, you'll then be making the conscious decision of, right, do I want this calorie dense food, or would I rather have like a bigger meal that's going to make me feel fuller for longer? And that's where the education side of it comes in within this kind of like fat loss phase. So as I said, the majority of people start here in the fat loss phase, and this can last anywhere from like 6 weeks up to 12, 18 months, depending on how much body fat you've got to lose. If it's a longer one, we do incorporate things like diet breaks, which are periods of time where we take your calories back up to maintenance to give you a bit of a mental break and let your body reset. So we want to get you down to 10 to 12% body fat for men, and then 20 to 22% body fat for women before transitioning into a building phase. So the reason behind this, excuse me, the reason behind this is, as I said, insulin sensitivity. So what this does is it gives us the maximum window to be able to build muscle tissue, because once you start going below 10% body fat, your body then, or 20 to 22% body fat for women, that's going to get much, much harder. Like every percent down underneath that, your body's going to be really, really acting against it. Whereas from here, it's person dependent, but add 10 to 15% body fat onto each of these. And that's kind of like the top end of where you can still build muscle in. So say, for example, if you start at 17% and you drop down to 10% and it's taken you 16 weeks to get to 10%, you then go into a building phase, so 16 weeks is 4 months. You would then want to be in a calorie surplus for at least 1.5 to 2 times as long as you'd been in a deficit to put on that same amount of weight. If you're doing it naturally, which the majority of my clients are, I don't really work with anybody assisted. With that weight that comes on, you may put on, let's just say 10 pounds, just for nice round numbers. Out of those 10 pounds, if you're very new to training, you might put on, say, 6 pounds or so, 5-6 pounds of muscle and 5-6 pounds of fat. You've already gone through a fat loss phase. So then when we pull your body fat kind of like back down to 10 to 12%, you can then see the physical changes that have happened because you've put on that new muscle tissue. But before transitioning into a building phase, we want to take you up to maintenance. So a maintenance phase progressing into a building phase. So after a diet, there's a period of maintenance. The reason behind this is that we want to get your body, like, as I said, accustomed to that new weight kind of that you're at. It only needs to be there for a week or two, just because if you're going into a building phase, we want to bring those calories up to put you into a small surplus, like quite quickly, so that you can take advantage of the rebound effect. But you don't want to do it like straight away, just because psychologically you're going to be very, very prone to overeating kind of at this point. So if we bump your calories up by 300 or 400, so it gives you just enough that you're then going to be eating enough to kind of get rid of the cravings and stuff that's going to be happening. It just helps us keep control of the tendency to then go into overeating. So as I said, we want to stay here for a few weeks to make it feel normal and then push on to pushing the food up. So this is the fun bit. This is where we start to get to add in kind of more calories and just see what happens kind of with your body. So in the muscle building phase, we're going to increase, oh, what's happened there? Okay, so we're increasing calories in order to build muscle. Now, depending on where you are in your fitness journey, if you're very, very new to training, you will have still built some new muscle tissue in the fat loss phase because the stimulus is so novel, you've never done it before, your body's going to have to adapt. If you're, say, 2 to 3 years in, it's very, very unlikely you're going to build new muscle tissue while being in a calorie deficit. Your body just doesn't want to do it, just because muscle tissue is very, very calorie expensive, and therefore if it lays down new muscle tissue, it's harder for your body to then survive when you are essentially, your body's going to start to go into what's called starvation mode. So because there's less energy coming in than coming out, having to use its energy stores, it then goes into survival mode, and it wants you to survive on the energy stores that you've got for as long as possible. So laying down new muscle tissue goes directly against that survival mode, and that's why it won't do it. So as I said, in the muscle building phase, we want to go into a small surplus. So what you'll hear about in bodybuilding circles is going into a bulk. But what the connotations of the word bulk is that you just go and eat everything in sight, put on a shed load of body fat. Now, that's not actually what a bulk is. A bulk is going into a small surplus so that you are adding on new tissue, but that's why I call it a muscle building phase rather than a bulking phase, just so we get those connotations out. So if you ever hear me talking about a bulk, I'm just trying to get out of the habit of using that word, just because, as I said, it tends to lead to people overeating. whereas we're going into a small surplus. So we want to be looking at adding, say, over a 4-week period, you might want to add on £1 to £2 in a month. So you're looking at what's that, 250 grams a week. But here's the mistake again a lot of people make, is that they will add in some extra calories and their weight will jump up by like a kilo very quickly, and then they'll pull the calories back down and then it will kind of plateau off. And then they might drop down half a kilo and they start like making micro changes like this. Whereas what you've got to do with the bulking phase is take a step back and go, right, what's happened over the last 3 weeks? So let's look at the average over the last 3 weeks, and has my weight gone up by, say, 3 or 4 weeks, half a kilo? Perfect. That's right where it needs to be. Whereas if it's only gone up by like, if it's plateaued for like 4 weeks, that's when you then add in some like 50 to 100 more calories, depending on where kind of like your ratios are. So what I would normally do is protein stays pretty stable at like, depending on how lean you are. So if you're at if you are at those low body fat percentages, like I said on the last slide, you do 2 grams per kilo of body weight. So if you weighed 80 kilos but with 10% body fat, then you do about 160 grams of protein. Whereas if you are at a higher body fat percentage, I'll tend to do it off lean body mass. But again, that just gets into the science of it. And the protein stays pretty similar, no matter what kind of happens with your body fat percentage. Once you get like a set point of protein, we might reassess that like once a year or something like that, because if you've added on a shed load new more muscle tissue, you might need to bump your protein content up a little bit. After that, once you're kind of like fats, what you'll find is that in the peak of a dieting phase, your fats might drop down to like 30, 40 grams, depending on if you're male or female. So basically, the lower your calories go, fats are very, very calorie dense. So those will drop down kind of quite low, and you'll get the majority of your calories from carbohydrates rather than fats, just because you can then get more bulky food that's going to make you feel fuller. Whereas on the way up, you're going to want to bring your fats level up to anywhere between 60 to 90 kilos, and then the rest of 60 to 90 grams, not kilos. 90 kilos of fat is a lot. 60 to 90 grams, and then the rest of your calories are probably going to come from carbohydrates to be fueling that training that you're doing. So this is where having somebody who's kind of like experienced in like the tweaks you kind of need to make makes a big difference. So what we will normally do is in a muscle building phase, you will go up by say 100 kilos at a time. That might be 5 grams of fat and then 10 to 15 grams of carbs until your fat is at a place where it's going to stick. And then you might be adding on 20 grams of carbs each time that you jump up by kind of like 100 calories. So what is dirty bulking? Dirty bulking. So a dirty bulk is where you go into a building phase and you just eat everything. So you eat as much as you can, you get really high calorie shakes in, and you just get fat. And the problem with this is because it's not incrementally increasing, you will find you put on much more body fat than muscle, and you get up to that 20% body fat like very, very quickly, which means then you need to go into a dieting phase, but you haven't spent long enough in the muscle building phase to have built a considerable amount of muscle mass. So then if you go into a dieting phase, you may just then lose that muscle mass that you've built because you're having to yo-yo between these two phases. So why do we need this phase? So the reason we need this phase, as I said, is it's the physiology of building muscle. Once you're out of your first year or two of training, you have to be in a calorie surplus to be able to build muscle. It's just physiology. And it's one of those things where what we'll often find when we're going into a dieting phase, as your body fat comes down, sometimes you'll look at your physique and go, I'm looking quite skinny because we've brought the body fat off, but I don't have enough muscle mass to kind of like match my frame. So we'll always kind of like have a discussion as you're getting close to the body fat levels that you'd be like happy at maintaining of, right, well, what do you think of your physique? Would you be happy to have this maintain here? Or would you like to build some more muscle tissue because you want bigger arms, you want bigger shoulders, or you want those curves, you want a bigger bum, or whatever it is? We can have those conversations at that time. It's just hard to see how much muscle mass you've got underneath body fat. So does everyone need this phase? No, not everybody does need this phase. Sometimes when you pull body fat off, you get it down to a certain level, and then that person is happy to stay there, in which case you would just go into the maintenance phase. And the final set of slides on this is how we would then cycle out of the habits that you incorporate into your lifestyle as part of kind of the fat burning phase, so that you don't have to be tracking food essentially for the rest of your life, because that's not a nice place to be unless you're a bodybuilder. So the reason we get down to 10% body fat is so that we can stay in a surplus until we get to 15 to 20%. Already explained that before. And if it takes 12 to 16 weeks to drop the fat off, we want it to take at least twice as long to put the weight back on. It takes a lot longer to build muscle than fat. So again, I've explained that before already. So maintenance phase, we're looking to stay there. So if we go back to this one, so as I said, you've got the cutting phase, the maintenance phase, the building phase. After a building phase, you're always going to have a little bit more body fat than you probably want to maintain, which is why we then go back into a cutting phase before going back to the maintenance phase. The maintenance phase, we're looking to stay there. So again, after a diet, there's a period for maintenance. So if we've just come out of a building phase, you would also have another maintenance phase after a building phase, so that you don't just peel off all that new muscle tissue. But that's just to do with, as I said, new muscle tissue that's just been built is probably going to be very susceptible to being burned off. So when you're at the peak of like an off season or a building phase, again, we would stay there for say 2 to 3 weeks for your body to become accustomed to being that new like high weight, before then adding in a little bit of cardio. Or you can actually start dieting. So I've got guys that are at the top end of their building phase. They're at like 3,500 calories, but their body is utilizing all that energy to build new muscle tissue. And then all we do is we add in like 3 bouts of 20 minutes of cardio, and they start pulling off body fat, even though they're eating 3,500 calories. And that's why we do it incrementally, because as you slowly build up, your body becomes accustomed to that new level of food that's going in there and utilizing that food, which means it's then very easy to push it into a deficit, even with high levels of food. And as I said, that's why you want to have these different phases, so that you're not on like 1,000 calorie a day diet from like day one. So after you've gone through your dieting phase, you want to stay here for a few weeks to make it feel normal again. So we will bring those calories back up to maintenance. So our body weight then stabilizes at the kind of new low. We're at a body fat percentage we like. When we look at our photos, we're happy with what we see in the mirror, and we're like, right, this is where I want to stay. So as I said, we've got to bring those calories back up slightly, maybe 2, 3, 4, 500, depending on how much of a deficit that you're in. And we would then slowly drop out cardio as well, to get you to a point where, say, right, okay, my body weight has stayed stable for say like 3, 4 weeks at this point. I'm eating a good amount of food, and I've got like no cardio in there, unless cardio is something that you enjoy and you plan to carry on doing for quite a while. So at that point, as I said, when your cardio is low, maybe you're just tracking your steps, your food is at like a nice manageable level where you would be happy to eat that amount of food every single day. The training that you're doing is training that you enjoy. So again, you're going to be able to keep up these behaviors for a long period of time, like after you finished with the coaching program. We would then look at how to cycle the behaviors out to bring your eating kind of back to normal again. So the most common one is the tracking of food. So at the end of the day, most people, again, unless you're a bodybuilder, will not want to be tracking every single thing that they eat for the rest of their life. It's just not realistic. So what you would then do is, for example, if you're tracking all 3 of your main meals and all your snacks, you may drop out your snacks first and just track the main meals, because the main meals are going to have a lot more kind of calories in them. But again, you just check that your weight is again staying stable. So are you able to make good choices about snacks without kind of like tracking it? If your weight starts to jump up again, you would start to track your snacks again. You would then, if your weight, as I said, stayed stable for say 2 or 3 weeks or 2 weeks, you would then drop out tracking your evening meal. So you track breakfast, you track lunch, but you wouldn't track your evening meal and your snacks. And again, see, another week or two, has my weight stayed stable? You then drop out tracking your lunch. So again, you just track your breakfast, another week or two, does my weight kind of stay the same? And if at any point your weight starts to like creep up, you just bring back in the tracking to get to a point where you can look at your food and know, right, this is about kind of the portion size that I need to be eating. And then finally, you would then drop out kind of like tracking your breakfast. After you've stopped tracking and you've seen that your weight has stabilized for say 2, 3, 6 weeks without tracking food, you would then start to drop back on how often you're weighing yourself, because that can really mess with your mind. So if you were weighing yourself, say, twice a week, so you could get the average, you might drop it down to like once a week or once every 2 weeks, and then like once a month. So all you're doing with that is you're just checking that your weight isn't creeping up. You'd allow fluctuations of anywhere between like 1 and say 2 to 3 kilos, because with you stepping back so far, tracking once a month, there's going to be quite big fluctuations in weight. As you guys see, if you track every day, that you can fluctuate anywhere from like a kilo or 2 like over the day. So if you're tracking yourself like once a month, then allow for bigger fluctuations. Don't freak out if you're like 2 kilos heavier on that thing. However, if you start to see your weight starting to kind of like creep back up, then you just bring back in those behaviors of like tracking your food and things like that to kind of get it back down. Hopefully by that point, you would have learned enough through the process of the coaching program that you could kind of get yourself back on track. Whereas actually sometimes it's the accountability that's the big thing. So again, if you then fell off the wagon, that's when then you'd reach back out in terms of coaching. Now, when would you stop coaching in this phase is completely up to you. So I'd say at the minimum, we would want you to get to the point where we've stabilized your body weight. You're still tracking everything, but we've stabilized your body weight for like 2 to 3 weeks. And that I'd be happy to let you go at that point and then start doing the cycling of like the food back out like yourself. If you would want to be with a coach throughout that whole process, like you can, but most people can cycle themselves back out of like tracking food. Just don't let it go from like tracking every single thing that you eat to tracking nothing like overnight, because you will start to kind of like overeat quite quickly. So that's why we do that phased out approach. So in summary, you've got 3 main phases. You've got the cutting phase, the maintenance phase, and the building phase. Each one has a specific kind of point in a journey, and what you will find is you may go around this cycle anywhere from like 1 to as many times as you want during your coaching journey, depending on what your goals are, and your goals can change. So I've got clients that came to me and at first they just wanted to lose weight. Whereas now, actually, they've lost the weight, and then what's the next thing? Okay, so now let's like push towards getting into like a photo shoot level of condition. Once they've kind of done a photo shoot, it might be, okay, now I want to step on stage as a competitor. So your goals can change throughout this process. Like there's no need for them to kind of be set in stone, and you don't need to jump off this cycle kind of just because you've kind of got to the maintenance phase. And you might find that we just keep resetting your goals. And I'm happy to coach you for as long as you are seeing results, you're doing the recommendations that I'm giving to you each week in your check-ins, and that you're happy to kind of like carry on. So hopefully that is useful to you guys to understand that, as I said, the different aspects of the training cycle. And as always, if you have any questions about this stuff, you can either ask them to me through DM on the app, Or if you're not one of my one-to-one training clients, then drop me a DM on Instagram. The handle is @DHPT, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you guys have.